What you're about to hear is part 1 of a two-part series on how to beat the Dark Elves Vortex campaign on Legendary difficulty. Part 1 is going to focus on the overall goals of the campaign, optimizing the race-specific mechanics of the Dark Elves, utilizing the unique Dark Elf Rites, as well as diving deep into buildings and technology. Part 2 is going to focus on army composition and early game strategy for both Malekith and Morathi, and will be coming down the line. Timestamps will be in the description below for those who want to jump around to specific parts of the guide. And with that said, without further ado, let's begin. Good morning, afternoon, or evening, everyone. My name is Elivaras, and I'll be guiding you through how to beat the Dark Elves Vortex campaign on Legendary difficulty. There's a lot to get through in this first part, so I'm going to briefly go over the overall goals as they are relatively the same for every major faction that you're going to play in the Vortex campaign. But we're still going to briefly go over them just for the sake of it and to get some people up to speed if you're unsure of the exact mechanics. So there's two methods by which you can achieve victory. The first is completing these 5 rituals that you can see at the top of the screen here. Each ritual will take a number of ritual resource currency to complete, and you can get ritual resource currency in 3 ways. The first way is by looking at the specially marked spots on the map. In this case, our Dark Elves are marked with little scrolls, and those will allow you to build these special buildings. In the Dark Elves case, Temples of Hakardi, in which will generate 10 of your ritual resource currency per turn. The second way is through hunting in ruins. You can go treasure hunting in ruins, and you have a rare chance of getting ritual resource currency. Quite a lot of it, but I would not recommend it as there's a high chance of getting some really nasty effects like wounding your lord or a irreversible bad trait that reduces leadership. So I just wouldn't recommend ruin hunting, especially for your ritual resource currency. On that note, you cannot get them from places in the ocean, so while hunting in the ocean is very profitable, don't expect to come out here and get a ton of ritual resource currency because it's not happening. It's not one of the drops. The third way is through quests that you randomly get through every campaign. Well, some of them are scripted, some of them are random. But overall, unless these quests are on the way to whatever else you're doing, like if I'm coming this way over to Hag Hall and it's like, kill an army over here, and then sure, go ahead, kill that army over there. But if I'm going to Hag Hall and it says, come kill an army down over here, then no, you don't want to go and do that because you're going to waste all these turns for like 6 or 10 scrolls of Hakardi, but you could be gaining 10 per turn from these ritual resource sites. So that's how you get ritual resource currency. You need a number of it per ritual. Once you start a ritual, there will be 10 turns. The final one is 20 turns. But 10 turns where you have to hold off from chaos stacks that'll only be at war with you. You and only you. And this goes for other factions too. If they start a ritual, there will be chaos stacks that are only at war with them. So you're going to have to defend your territory from these chaos stacks who are going to come after your ritual resource sites. And there's 3 sites. Which will be stated before you start your ritual. In this case, it's these 3 right here. Chaos armies will spawn in or near your territory and come for these sites. However, be warned that they are not unwilling to burn down anything in their way and attack armies in their way. So you've got to make sure that you've got walls up everywhere, or else you could be losing a lot of settlements. When you get to the 3rd ritual and beyond, Skaven stacks will start spawning as well. That'll only be at war with you. And because of how many armies are going to start spawning in the higher rituals, I would recommend that you don't start too many of these rituals unless your borders are secure and you're not at war with too many factions. Because if I start this ritual, let's say it's like 100 turns earlier, I decide I'm going to start my 3rd ritual, then I decide I'm going to start my 3rd ritual. Okay, boom, Skaven stacks, boom, Chaos stacks, and then suddenly Mazdamundi invades from the south, and Tyrion invades from the east. Suddenly, I have a crisis on my hands. I've got Chaos armies, Skaven armies that are only going for me, and Tyrion and Mazdamundi are invading my territory, and there's a good chance I could either be terribly set back or lose the campaign outright. So you definitely have to be careful there. Make sure you're not fighting too many wars. On the point of walls, the walls aren't just there so that it takes longer for the Chaos armies to get to your ritual resource sites. You want the walls there so they have to siege you out, allowing you to get resource armies over to those settlements. So let's say I've got walls at Arnheim and a Chaos army spawns in the water. They come siege Arnheim. This is not when I sit here in the ancient city Kintax and be like, oh, it's going to take them forever to get here. That's when I march out, go reinforce Arnheim, and push them back. Them having to siege you out gives you a ton of time to get reinforcing armies in range to kill them and clear them out. So once you get to the fifth ritual, once you get the fifth ritual and you complete it, 20 turn channeling, then you fight a final quest battle. If you beat that quest battle, congratulations, you've won the campaign. I would like to note that other major factions are also in this race. As you can see, the Last Defenders are currently in this race here. On Legendary especially, it's very likely that a lot of these factions will make it to the end before you. In my case, Lothern made it way quicker than anyone else, and they got to the final ritual. And if they complete their final ritual, if they do the 20 turns and they complete and all their settlements are secure, because as you can see, to actually successfully complete a ritual, you need to hold the 3 settlements the whole time. Or not the whole time, you need to have them by the end of the ritual. So if you lose one, you still have time to get it back. But you have to hold all of them by the end of the ritual. But if they hold all of them, they complete this final ritual, you take on the enemies in their final quest battle. And if you lose that battle, you've lost the campaign. But if you win, you hold them at bay for another 10 turns before they can start doing the ritual over again. So you've got about a 30-turn buffer time before you have to fight that final quest battle again, which is a lot of time in which you can be trying to knock them off the map or severely hamper them. Another few things to note, you can spawn intervention armies. These intervention armies come in varying strengths depending on how much gold you want to spend. You can only summon 1 intervention per faction's ritual, and you can only summon them against factions who you are at war with. So I cannot summon an intervention against the Last Defenders unless I'm at war with them, and I can only summon 1. Doesn't matter what strength, I can only summon 1. These intervention armies will spawn right next to one of their ritual sites. So, for example, we can see he's got a ritual site over here. Had I summoned an intervention army, it's possible that an intervention army would have spawned right here and gone and sieged the Temple of Skulls. Another thing I'd like to say about intervention armies real quick is that I'd say, especially against a faction that's super powerful, hold off until one of the final turns, because in my campaign, I held off till like 2 turns left in the ritual. I spawned it, and it happened to spawn right next to undefended Tor Elisor. They burned it down. The Lizardmen could not recolonize in time, because if you get to the point where you burn down one of their ritual sites, but they have time enough to recapture it before the ritual's over, then you've kind of wasted that opportunity. You want them to fail the ritual as a result, so you want to do it as late as possible. But you do want to give a few turns so that your intervention army can siege the garrison out and build enough siege weapons so they can win. If you spawn it with 1 turn left, they likely won't be able to burn it down if it has walls. The other option is the classic domination victory. So this requires you to beat every other major faction on the map. So this is Tyrion. In the Dark Elves case, you have to beat Tyrion's faction, Teclis's faction, Mazdamundi's, Kroq-Gar's, Queek Headtakers, and Lord Skrolk's. You beat all of them, and then you have to own a combined total of 50 provinces. Congratulations, you've won the campaign. So that's going to cover for overall goals. I might go more in depth in a future video in the future and discuss more in-depth tactics and strategy you can use, but overall, that's what you're trying to do. And without further ado, let's hop into some unique Dark Elf mechanics, starting with the slave economy. The main new faction mechanic of the Dark Elves is the introduction of a slave economy, a super powerful mechanic that can make or break your campaign, and we can access it in the Slaves tab found in the bottom right of your screen next to the end turn. We can see a number of headers here, and there's a few we're most concerned about. First, the max slaves of the province. This is how many slaves a province can hold, and it is directly affected by how many settlements are in the province, as well as some other factors, but mainly it's the number of settlements. So if you've got 4 settlements, you can hold something like 17,500 slaves, and if you've got 3 settlements, something like 14,000. So more settlements, more slaves you can hold. You can see current slaves in that province. Slaves are earned from sacking settlements or from enslaving captives after a battle. We can see our capacity as a percentage as well. As you can imagine, slaves are going to die as a result of the abuse they receive, and this is your decline per turn. So how many slaves of a percentage of your total slaves in that province will die per turn. And then we can see the totalment settlement value, income, and public order. So this is just the amount of income the settlement is producing from slaves and from everything else. And the amount of public order the settlement is being changed by as a result of the slaves and buildings and everything else. But naturally, we're more interested in the effect the actual slaves have on these values. So Slaves will produce a number of income at the cost of public order. The more slaves you have in your province, the more horribly mistreated people you have that will likely want to rebel. So the larger the public order penalty of those slaves. As a result, you can see here minus 11 in the Iron Peaks just from slaves. However, the more slaves you have, the more income they produce. So we can see we're gaining almost 10 grand in income from a ton of slaves. So you're gaining a ton of income at the cost of public order. However, if not used correctly, this income won't actually be that high, and your public order likely won't be changed very much either. So on that note, if ignored, if you don't use this mechanic to its fullest, or you kind of ignore it, you really won't see any effect. As I was just saying, you'll see basically no effect in public order. You'll basically be seeing no effect in income, and it's as if this mechanic wasn't there. However, if used correctly, you can generate tens of thousands of extra gold per turn. See here, Iron Peaks, almost 10 grand. We can see here the Broken Lands, almost 16 grand per turn. That's pretty insane. So you might be asking, how do we get numbers as ridiculous as this? Well, let's dive into optimizing your slave economy. So there are about 6 or 7 points that we're going to want to go through in terms of how to optimize your slave economy. So the first thing that I'd like to note, every time you capture new territory in a new province, you're going to want to select the No More Slaves option on the right side for that province. You're going to want to find it in the list, and you're going to want to select No More Slaves for that province. You only want slaves pouring into the provinces specifically tailored to harbor them. With that covered, how do we tailor our provinces to harbor them, and which provinces do we choose? So let's figure out how to choose the right provinces. So the first thing you want to look at when choosing the right provinces are landmark buildings that affect the income of slaves. For example, Kar has the best one in the game here, Slave Traders' Palaces. You get plus 30% income from slave pens and slave markets, all regions in this province. Slave decline rate, so slaves die slower for all provinces, so this will affect all provinces, and slaves will cause less public order penalties across all provinces. So this is the best slave building in the game at Kar. There's another good one over here in Tor Yvresse, in northern Yvresse. If we go into the buildings, I don't have it built yet because I don't have it upgraded to tier 5, but we can see the Amphitheater of Yvresse. Income generated per 100 slaves in the province. 50, that is quite a lot. If you think about it, Tor Yvresse has 3 settlements, so you've got a max cap of about 14,000 slaves. If each slave is generating 50 gold per 100 slaves in the province, you're getting, just because of this building, 7,000 income from slaves per turn. So this is also a very powerful building. However, it does increase slave decline rate by plus 10%. So plus 10% of the current slave decline rate doesn't suddenly make your decline rate like 12% from 2%. It just plus 10% of whatever the current one is. So it's not too much of a issue. So yeah, you're gonna want to look for those landmark buildings that directly influence slaves. The other landmark buildings you're gonna want to look for are landmark buildings that increase income for the whole province. So for example, the ancient city of Kintex. I've got a level 5, the Sanctum of Kintex, which increases income from all buildings by 100%. In Harganeth over here, I've got Hellebron's Palace, which gives plus 50% income from all buildings in the province, for all regions in the province. So those will directly affect your slave pens and your slave markets and allow them to get to produce more income. I'm pretty sure that's the case. However, there is a possibility I might be wrong. I'm just pretty sure that's the case. So the second major selling point when choosing a province is the number of settlements in that province. Ideally, you want 4. So in this case, the Broken Lands. I've got the best slave building in the game and 4 settlements in this province in which I can build slave buildings to further increase the amount of money I'm earning from slaves. So the more settlements, the better for not only the max capacity of slaves can increase, but also the more slave pens and buildings you can build to increase the income of the slaves that you have. So 4 settlements with a landmark building is the most ideal place. However, 3 settlements is still okay. Definitely like Northern Yvresse, their Amphitheater of Yvresse giving 50 income for 100 slaves. If you've got 3 settlements in your province, that's a pretty good capacity of slaves you can have, so you can still get a ton of money. Ideally, however, you don't want to go below 3 settlements. You don't really want to waste time trying to get slave money from a 2 settlement province, as the money just won't be there because the capacity isn't there. So if you find if you find a province with both an awesome landmark building like Kar and tons of settlements, also like the area around Kar, the Broken Lands, then these settlements or these provinces are the ones you're going to want to gun for as the situation permits, obviously. So as soon as you can, you're going to want to get over here as the Dark Elves and claim this area and build up Kar so you can get the slave traders' palaces and start getting the slave economy rolling. So okay, so now we've got the provinces selected. It's time to start making that dough. So without the correct buildings in place, you will still make almost nothing. It doesn't matter if I build these slave traders' palaces, plus 30% income from slave pens and slave markets. If I don't have any slave pens and slave markets, well, there's no income increase here. So we're going to need to build the right buildings. Besides the landmark buildings, the one that will be bringing in the money, or the big dough, the cha-ching, are going to be the slave pens and slave markets. Slave markets, the upgraded version. You can build a slave pen in every single minor settlement, and this will add 10 income generated per 100 slaves in the province, and increase income from slaves in the whole province by plus 10%. So I can build 1 per minor settlement, and we can even upgrade this in our capital for 15 income generated per 100 slaves in the province, and income from slaves plus 25% in the whole province, and slave decline rate is minus 50%, and the public order penalty is lowered by 30%. So the slave market is very powerful. Slave pens just help you continue to boost that income. And if you've got something like the amphitheater of Yvres, like the one thing to note, as I was just about to say this, is that this income generated per 100 slaves, 10 and 15, these stack. So this one generates 10 per 100 slaves. This one generates 10. This one generates 10. Well, the one in the capital generates 15. So you've got 10, 10, 15. You've got 35 already generated per 100 slaves. Oh, wait, amphitheater of Yvres, 50 per 100. You know what that means? 85 per 100 slaves. Suddenly you're making massive amounts of money. So you got to make sure you build these buildings in every settlement that you can. So now we have the provinces selected. We have the proper buildings built, and it is time to start putting slaves in these provinces. So the very highest degree of slave-keeping provinces, the ones with tons of settlements and great landmark buildings, you're going to want to set to request additional slaves. So it will receive 3 times its normal share of slaves. So your largest and important provinces, such as the Broken Lands with Kar's slave traders' palaces, and Tor Yvres with the amphitheater of Yvres, you're going to want to set these to request additional slaves, because you want the slaves immediately going in and filling these places back up after the slaves have declined a bit. All other chosen provinces, so all your other ones that are harboring slaves but are not as important as your major ones, you're going to want to set to receive slaves. And as aforementioned, all other provinces that are not going to be getting money from slaves should be set to no more slaves, as you can see here. So with all that covered, how do you actually get slaves? I did briefly mention that earlier in the video, and basically you get it from sacking settlements, raiding, and enslaving captives after a battle. So that's how you're going to earn slaves. But there's a few things that help you. There's a few other things that contribute to the money you earn from slaves and how many slaves you can capture. So in terms of money earned from slaves, we can see in your slave provinces, you should be setting the commandment to increase slave production quota. So plus 10% income from slaves. That's pretty good. There's another thing in technologies. I'm going to go more in depth into these in its own dedicated section, but one you're going to want to get is daylight denied. Plus 15% income from iron mines, gold mines, and stone quarries, whatever, that's fine. But income from slaves plus a further 10%. So that's even more income for your slaves. The other thing, this isn't going to directly affect the income from slaves, but on lords, they have abilities. Let's see if I can find a lord here. Here's a lord. They have abilities down here, dreaded slaver. So you capture more casualties post-battle. More casualties, more slaves, the faster you're going to be filling up these provinces and replacing the decline of slaves. There's also some heroes, I believe. I'm pretty sure, who is it? Let me see if I can find some heroes here. Let's see if we can look at Sabioth here. We can see Sabioth here. So these Canaanite assassins can increase income from slaves by additional 10% at their level 3 for the province they're standing in. So you can hire a bunch of Canaanite assassins to further increase slave income. So you've got the amphitheater of your vest generating 50 income per 100 slaves. You've got all your other surrounding buildings bringing it up to 85. 10% from technologies, 10% from slave production quota. And you've also now got a ton of Canaanite assassins in here who are boosting it by a further 10%. Suddenly you can make almost 20k. Like if let's say I wanted to stack up, I don't, because I don't normally like stacking up tons of heroes. I think it's a little bit cheesy. But if you really want to take advantage of the system, stack up a ton of Canaanite assassins in this province, all with the plus 10% income from slaves, and you can make up to 30 grand. I would expect. Well, maybe not 30, like 20, 25, potentially 30, just from this province, depending on all of the stuff you have here and the Canaanite assassins too. So take advantage of all of those things when you're considering, when you're trying to optimize your slave economy. So there's another thing I'd like to mention here. On all difficulties, especially very hard legendary, the release captives for money option post-battle is the best option in the early game. So this is when you're trying to build up your army, build up your settlements. The early game is not when you should be caring about slaves, because you don't have provinces set up in the optimal way to take advantage of these slaves. What you should be doing is getting money so you can build up your army and build up your provinces. So you're, especially on very hard legendary, going to want to release captives for money. However, in the mid to late game, when you've started getting provinces that are suited to taking slaves, that's when you're going to want to change to enslaving captives and getting all those slaves. So you also want to mention, I also want to mention that because you can get a ton of slaves from sacking higher level settlements, so even if it takes an extra turn, there's a lot of times where you can sack and then occupy in the same turn if you have enough movement. If you don't have enough movement and your army isn't in danger, I would just say just go ahead and sack it. That extra 1,000 slaves, which is definitely worth it, going to boost your income by quite a bit, and just occupy the next turn. You need all the slaves you can get, especially you need all the slaves you can get, especially if they're declining per turn. So that is just about how to maximize your slave economy. You can see if I go into my slave panel here, if done correctly, you can be making upwards of 10k per turn. As you can see in the Iron Peaks, making just about 10k. The Broken Lands making 16k. You can boost further with stacking a ton of Canaanite assassins in that territory as well. And the last thing I'd like to say is, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of slaves cause public order penalties. So make sure you've either got buildings like the Court of the Dark Prince to increase that public order and balance it out, or be prepared for a lot of rebellions. So have armies nearby and a strong garrison. But yeah, that's about going to cover it for the slave economy. And next, we're going to be moving into the second new mechanic for the Dark Elves, Names of Power. So stay tuned for that. The second unique faction mechanic of the Dark Elves are Names of Power. Each non-legendary lord, upon reaching level 12, can choose one of 3 names of power that you can see here. When you choose a name, immediately after, an event, randomly chosen from a pool based on the name you chose, will occur. But we'll discuss that in a second. Let's talk about the 3 names of power themselves. So first on the left here you see the Martial name of power. This name of power will improve the lord's own combat skills. Second, we have the Revered name of power. This name of power will improve the Lord's army as a whole. And the Aristocratic name of power. This name of power will either influence the province the Lord is in or buff the whole faction. So as I said before, when you choose one of these 3 names, Martial, Revered, or Aristocratic, an event will spawn, much like the one you can see on the screen now. This event will have you choose between two options, which buff your lord, army, or province in a different way based on the name you chose. There are a number of events that can occur per name choice, and each event has two unique options specifically tailored to that event. So you won't see duplicate events, and by extension, duplicate lord, army, or province buffs until you start getting a ton of lords. To show this off, we're going to hop into some examples here. So we can see here, we're going to start off with aristocratic, and this is the one that buffs the faction as a whole or the province the lord is in. So first we're going to see the dire overseer here, providing growth. This is really what you're going to see in this name, just the growth for the local province, because otherwise, like the plus 5% trade agreement tariffs, not very useful because it's only the tariffs. It's not on trade money. You get like 80 gold in tariffs for every faction you're trading with, so it's pretty useless. Additional tradable resources produced plus 5%. That's not too bad, but you're probably not going to be trading with too many people as the Dark Elves, so it's not really that good either. But the other option here, torture him. Name of power, the Tormentor. Casualties captured post-battle plus 15%, and income from post-battle loot plus 10%. This is definitely the stronger one out of these two. As you can see, in our last part, when we were talking about slaves, we're going to need a lot of slaves to buff that slave economy. So getting extra casualties is awesome because that means more slaves. And because we're going to be fighting a lot of battles to get more casualties, income from post-battle loot is also better too. So I definitely go for that one out of the two. Here's a third aristocratic option, minus 15% upkeep for Black Ark Corsairs, and income from ports plus 5%. So this would be pretty good. This would be pretty good for a lord that you're going to have with mostly Black Ark Corsairs. So you could just build a whole army of just Black Ark Corsairs and Black Ark Corsairs handbows, and then you'd have minus 15% upkeep for that whole army. And you can add that with lord effects of like Quartermaster to give a further minus 15%, and then Renown to give a further minus 8%, and your 38% upkeep off that army, which is pretty good. And income from ports plus 5%, all regions, not too bad. We can see the second option here is pretty interesting, Gate Smiter. We get plus 10 leadership when laying siege, minus 10 for the enemy when laying siege in the local region. So the Lord's army gets plus 10 leadership when laying siege, but in the region, in the local region, not province, region that this lord is in, the enemy gets minus 10 leadership when laying siege. So if there's if one of your castles is getting sieged and you bring this lord over, then suddenly it's going to be harder for them to take the fortresses. They're going to lose quite a bit of leadership. And reload time reduction plus 15% for Reaper Bolt Thrower units, so really good for laying siege with this army. And here's some martial options. So if you don't recall, martial improves the Lord's combat abilities, the Lord's own combat abilities. So we can see Soul Blaze here, plus 5 armor, plus 50% fire resistance, and enables flaming attacks. But here's a really cool one, Hydra Blood. Passive ability of regeneration. That is quite strong. So yeah, definitely going to go for that one if I had to choose between the two. Here's a third option for Marshall. Worm Scale, plus 3 armor, plus 5% speed, 8 melee defense. Not too bad there. And Drake Cleaver, plus 30 bonus versus large, which is pretty strong too. I honestly don't know which one I'd choose out of these two. If I was going to put my Dreadlord on a dragon, actually, I don't even know, really, because the extra melee defense and stuff would be good. But I guess if I was going to put him on a dragon, I could have them dueling just dragons and eagles for the bonus versus large, but who knows? It's up to you. And now we're going to go into some revered name of power examples. So this is buffs the Lord's army. And these ones are really cool because what they provide is they provide a way to really tailor your army specifically. So Beastbinder, we can see we get a ton of extra leadership for Harpies, War Hydras, and Black Dragons. And we get minus 20% upkeep for Harpies, War Hydras, and Black Dragons. So that's super strong. And then charge bonus, plus 20 for Harpies, War Hydras, and Black Dragons. So this would be like your all-monster army if you were going to go with Beastbinder. You just bring tons of Dragons, War Hydras, and Harpies, and you'd have much less upkeep for it. You wouldn't be paying as much for them, and they'd be buffed up pretty crazily. And here's the other one here. So Fang Shield. Physical resistance, 10% for Bleak Swords, Dread Spears, and Dark Shards. Leadership, plus 10 for Bleak Swords, Dread Spears, and Dark Shards. So not for high-tier armies. This is really going to be, like, for example, like a low to mid-tier army that you might have defending your province or taking out some easier settlements in, or like, cleaning up after a big assault, stuff like that. This is where these guys will this is where these buffs will come in handy, but overall not as strong in the late game, as you're not going to be using as much Bleak Swords, Dread Spears, or Dark Shards. But in the early to mid game, this can actually be used quite effectively. Here's a third one. Tempest of Talons, plus 10 leadership for Cold One Knights, Cold One Dread Knights, and Cold One Chariot units. Upkeep minus 15% for those same units, and weapon strength plus 10%. So this is pretty strong if you're going to want a solid cavalry army to maybe bully around like the human colonies and stuff like that, and high elves. This is going to be a pretty cool one to have. But here's the other option, which is also really, really strong. Plus 35% range for Shade units. I believe they have base 140. So that's going to be able to make them contend with the High Elf archers. Unit experience, plus 2 for Shade units. Not bad. And then they also cause fear, which it's decent, but they're not going to be in range of enemy units very often. However, once they run out of ammo, the Shades are pretty good in one-on-one combat with other units. So this can actually be used pretty well as well. So yeah. Like, these are 2 super strong buffs. Really depends on your preference, but Shadow Dart plus 35% range for Shade units is so strong. I think, honestly, I'd go for that one. But yeah, I believe that's all I have for my examples of the names of power. So what if you're looking to optimize these names of power? Well, it really depends. Overall, if I was to rank the names in terms of potency in the campaign, I'd say Revered is better. So Revered, the ones that buff the army, is better than Aristocratic, which is the ones that buffs the province or the faction as a whole, which is better than Martial. The reason Martial is the lowest on the list is because it only buffs the Lord. And I mean, like, for example, what's this ability here? Plus 3 armor, plus 5% speed, or plus 8 melee defense, or bonus first large, plus 30 just for the Lord. How does that have anything on something like plus 35% range for Shades units, or extra unit experience and fear, or minus 15% upkeep for all these cav and leadership and weapon strength and all this stuff, or like Gate Smiter for laying sieges, or upkeep minus 15% for Blackguard Corsairs, or extra casualties and income? Like, martial names of power are really good. They're really good if you want like a really buff lord. Like, you're like, okay, I really want like a really just awesome epic lord. Then sure, go martial. Like, for example, having regeneration on a lord would be awesome if you just really want a strong lord. But if you're really trying to optimize and play to the largest extent that you can, then definitely go for Revered first for these massive army buffs. You can build some really tailored armies that can be really, really strong and really, really cool in their own right. Aristocratic second, and yeah, Martial third. So yeah, overall, Revered is definitely the strongest, as it gives massive sweeping army buffs that, if built around correctly, can make an army basically invincible. This one, Shadow Dart, is probably one of the strongest, I would say. Plus 35% range for Shades is ridiculous. But yeah, that's about going to end it off for names of power. And next, we're going to go into the unique the unique Dark Elf Rites. So stay tuned. I'll be back with you shortly. As with every major New World faction, the Dark Elves have 4 unique rites available to them, which can be found next to the end turn button. Each rite costs a number of slaves to perform. It has a cooldown on how long it can be performed after it has been performed, and how long the effects last for, unless it's just an instant cast, and you get whatever effects it has on that turn. So we're going to go through these rites one by one and discuss some things about them. So first up, Sacrifice to Authority. This rite unlocks after issuing the Demand Highborn Hostages commandment. So you've got to own a full province, and then issue the commandment Demand Highborn Hostages, which provides plus 4 public order. Back to the rites panel. So it's pretty self-explanatory what this does. The public order boost is most useful early to mid-game, when you don't have the proper garrisons built up everywhere. When playing as Morathi, it's also super useful when you don't have your Sanctum of Kintex at max level, which we can go and take a look at here in Morathi's main settlement here, Sanctum of Kintex. Because when at maximum level, it provides a minus 90% public order penalty due to the presence or lack of corruption faction-wide. So that is, an area with very low corruption will only make you lose around 1 or 2 public order a turn rather than something like 12. So until you get that building upgraded, this right can be used to help ease those lack of corruption public order penalties. When playing as Malekith, this will be useful when Morathi's corruption starts to encroach on your territory. Until you can get altars, shrines, and temples of Cain built up for the untainted boost, then when playing as Malekith, this right can be very useful. However, it does only last for 5 turns. The loyalty boost is only, in my opinion, this is going to be more useful in the late game when you have little need for public order, but a great need for making sure your generals with super good units don't go AWOL and form their own faction. Speaking of which, this is a great time to talk about loyalty. Loyalty is a mechanic specific to Dark Elves and Skaven, and only affects non-legendary lords. A lord has a max loyalty of 10, where random events may spawn for that lord that can give you super powerful items. A lord has a minimum loyalty of 0, at which point they will break off, taking their army with them and starting their own faction. Loyalty can be raised by winning battles, equipping items, recruiting units, unique followers, or this sacrifice to authority right. Loyalty can be lost via losing battles, disbanding units in that lord's army, or standing around with nothing to do for too long. So this right can come in handy in the late game when you have super powerful units in a lord's army who might be close to going rogue that you don't want to lose. Second, sacrifice to Hekardi. This unlocks by performing an action with a sorceress hero. So if you get a sorceress hero through an event early on, which might happen, you can get this right very early on. However, if you don't, then you've got to be able to build that, I think it's a tier 4 building, if I'm not mistaken, that allows you to get a sorcerer before you can unlock this right. Sorceress, rather. There's not much to say about this right. Use this to power level your sorceresses, or before you hop into a very important battle where the extra winds of magic might be needed. Third, sacrifice to Cain. This unlocks by choosing the enslave captives post-battle option 3 times. This right is super powerful and is best used when you're about to launch a long campaign into enemy territory. To take advantage of this right, you want to make sure you're going to be engaging in battles, sacking and occupying settlements, etc. a lot over the course of the right's 15-turn duration. And also to keep up with the extra slave decline rate. Do note, though, that this is plus 50% on the current slave decline rate. So it's not just suddenly your decline rate is going to go from 2% to 52%. You're going to be losing half your slaves every turn. It's 50% of the current decline rate. So you're going to go from 2% to 3%. But do keep that in mind. This right allows you to profit a ton post-battle, but also allows you to keep fighting battles due to the massive casualty replenishment buff. But remember, you can only replenish in allied territory, so employ the sack first, then occupy tactic. The Dark Conduit army ability is also super strong. It provides an ability that can be used in battle on a friendly unit, causing a massive explosion around the targeted friendly unit. It will only damage enemy units, so don't worry about collateral damage. Due to its AoE around a friendly unit nature, it is best used on a friendly lord or hero who gets right into the middle of a decently packed enemy blob before blowing them all sky high. The radius is small, so this is essential. If used correctly, this ability can wipe out a whole enemy unit with one cast. Speaking of casts, it can be used 3 times per battle, but has a cooldown of 135 seconds. So you're going to make sure you want to use your first one pretty early so you can use the second one before the battle ends, or before opportunities to use it disappear. And also, it makes the unit you use it on exhausted, vigor-wise. So you notice it says minus 100% vigor there. So do note that the unit you use it on will suddenly become exhausted, and they'll be less effective in battle after that. Fourth, the most interesting Dark Elf right, the Sacrifice to Mathlan, and this does cost the most slaves. So this unlocks after building a slave pen, which is a building we went over earlier in the slave economy section. This building right here, slave pens. I would recommend building a slave pen ASAP just to unlock this right, and you can destroy it after if need be. Let's get back into the rights here. It has a long cooldown, 25 turns, and even though you might not be able to use them right away, it's best to start stocking up for when you need them. This right will allow you to construct a Black Ark, a mobile aquatic fortress from any owned port. It won't force you to to recruit one immediately after using the rite. It just gives you the option to recruit one when you need it. So that's why I said you should start stocking up on them early. But back to the fortresses themselves, and now we're going to head over to one of my black arcs. This is a relatively new one that I just recruited. So, they're basically like a Horde faction's army, but can only traverse the water. They can recruit an army, but start off with only one recruitment slot, which increases as you upgrade the main settlement chain building, this one right here. Each arc has a dotted circle around it, which you can see here, this little dotted circle going all the way around. Every land army within this ring will be provided artillery support from the arc, granting the army 3 powerful 3-cast bombardment spells in battle. So it'll get 3 new bombardment spells, and each bombardment spell can be cast 3 times, of course on a cooldown. It's not too long, it's like 45 seconds. And these bombardment spells are actually super powerful. However, do note that they can cause collateral damage, so be careful when casting them. Alongside this, any armies in the ring can recruit units that the Black Ark can recruit. So base units the Black Ark gets are Black Ark Corsairs and Black Ark Corsairs with handbows. So any armies in this ring can now recruit those units. If they upgrade this building, any armies in this ring can recruit those units. And if you build new buildings that allow you to recruit units, like the Monster Holes, Dragon Tower, all this, then armies within that ring can recruit those units too. Each arc has a number of buildings you can build, which do things like buff arc growth, increase the potency of these bombardment spells, or allow arcs and the armies near them to recruit better units. In my opinion, the main reason to build an army on an arc is not for the better auto-resolve on the seas. While that is useful, the best way to use an arc's army is to recruit a lord from the arc, which you can do. If I come over here, you can see you can recruit a lord. You can recruit heroes too, but you can recruit a lord from the arc. Transfer the Ark's units over to that lord and have your lord start pillaging some coastal settlements. When you finish raiding the coast, the lord can transfer these units back to the Ark and you can disband the lord. Remember, in Warhammer 2, every lord you recruit brings an extra 15% upkeep to all units in all armies you own, but Black Arks do not contribute to this 15%. So that's why you're going to want to just use it to recruit a lord temporarily, go raid some coasts and some coastlines, and then bring them back, send the units back to the Ark, and then disband the lord. Because it is useful to note that while you'd think a Black Ark might be able to attack a coastal settlement, Black Arks cannot attack any settlements on their own, even if they are on the coast. In terms of buildings, let's hop into the building browser for a second here. In my opinion, I'd go for the Arena first, which buffs Black Ark growth and unit experience for all unit recruits. Then I'd get the Slave Hold and its upgrades for the extra post-battle loot, the extra loot from sacking settlements, and the extra casualties captured post-battle in the ring around the Ark. And this is a ton of money. If you sack like a tier 4, tier 5 settlement, you can already get like 15-20k from it. Plus 60% from post-battle loot and 60% from sacking settlements will allow you to get even more money. That's crazy. And extra casualties to help with your slave economy. After that, you can go for either buffing your bombardment spells, or you can go for buildings that can help you recruit more units. Really, there, the choice is yours. What you want. Do you want your arc to be supporting your armies on the ground, or do you want them to be allowing your armies on the ground to recruit some more units? However, though, do make sure that you upgrade your main settlement chain building first of all. So let them just sit in port for a while and buff up till they're level 5 before you start potentially. Well, you don't necessarily have to leave them there, but make sure you get your arcs up to level 5 for all that growth it provides for the recruitment capacity. And it actually does provide a 4th army ability, or a 4th bombardment spell for any armies in the ring when it gets to level 5. So yeah, that's about going to wrap it up for Dark Elf Rites, and next we're going to discuss buildings. So stay tuned, don't go anywhere. And now, on to buildings. The way we're going to do this is we're going to discuss some of the most important Dark Elf buildings, and the buildings you should avoid. We're going to discuss buildings that both Morathi and Malekith can build, and then each of them specifically. So, buildings they can both take advantage of. Most Dark Elf buildings are quite strong. There's not many useless or inefficient ones. The military buildings really come down to what army composition you want, so we're not going to discuss much about those here. The advanced military, though, provide a few unique benefits on top of the extra new recruits. The Harpy Roost and its upgrades, I'd really only build for the recruitment it unlocks, as you're not going to be doing much trading as the Dark Elf, so these extra tradable goods aren't going to be that useful. The Dreadmant / Palace of Dread Knights is very good, as not only does it provide access to good units, the public order, lord recruit rank, and local recruitment capacity come in handy. I would recommend building one of these in just about every province when you can. The Sorceress's Abode / Tower of Dark Sorcery are decent, but don't provide too much on top of just the Sorceress recruitment. If you get a lot of these, it can boost research rate quite a bit, but I don't think that's super necessary. But, I mean, if you have the slots, why not? That said, it does provide a Dark Sorceress's garrison, so it's not a bad idea to build one in your most important capitals. The House of Assassins / Executioner's Hall should only really be built for the recruitment it provides. The hero success chance is kind of useless, since it won't be often you have enemy lords tromping through high-tier territory. However, when you are going to be starting a ritual, I would suggest looking at the ritual sites, seeing which ones Chaos and Skaven armies are going to attack, and maybe building one of these buildings there so you can more easily hamper their armies. The enemy hero action success chance negative modifier, though, is pretty useless, as ritual armies don't have heroes, and you'll rarely have enemy heroes in the territory so close to your capital. Walls are pretty self-explanatory. Build walls wherever you can, and they not only provide a better garrison, they also provide better shots from your tower. So you'll have like Shadows of Anlek. Shadows of Anlek is from your first wall. So you'll have Shadows of Anlek for that ability you can use, which is like a little cone-shaped AoE that can do quite a bit of damage if there's clumped enemy units. But it also improves your tower projectiles at every level. The Dark Elf Manors and its upgrades you should be building in every settlement in a province until that province has max settlement chain buildings. So these buildings, this building on the side here. So until all of them in that province are maxed. After that, make sure you do destroy them, though, as the extra 4% casualty replenishment rate is really not worth keeping there for all of the extra things you could get. The Artisan's House and its upgrades should be built in every settlement possible, for the money, of course. Especially in regions where there's a landmark building that increases income of all buildings in a province, like the Sanctum of Kintex, plus 100% at level 5. Definitely going to want to have these here, as they're going to be providing extra 600 income per turn at max level. Slave pens and its upgrades, everywhere you're going to set up your slave operations, as stated in the slave economy section. Lastly, roads are basically useless as they only apply to the region, not the province. If you get a mod that makes them apply to the province, then they are worth it. The other bonuses are too small to make up for its problems, so unless you are using aforementioned mod, don't bother with them. So now we're going to discuss the buildings specific to Marathi and Malekith. There's only like one or two for each of them. So Marathi has a faction-specific building called a Cultist Gathering, which is right here. This increases corruption and public order. I like to build these in every major settlement and sometimes even in minor settlements to help with public order issues and further boost corruption. It also unlocks recruitment of Death Hags and Witch Elves for Marathi. And you can see it increases capacity, increases recruit rank, all of this nice stuff. So definitely going to want to build these in a ton of places in your Marathi playthrough. Malekith has two faction-specific buildings. The first is an arena, which boosts public order. I would build one of these in every major settlement, and maybe even in minor settlements if public order is an issue. The second one Malekith has access to is an Altar of Cain and its upgrades. This is a great building because not only does it provide Untainted, but it also unlocks a lot of recruitment options. Build these in your military provinces or provinces with too much corruption. And that just about covers buildings. And now, finally, onto technology. And now, at long last, we've arrived at technologies. Dark Elf technologies are a series of 4 tiers. Each tier is divided into 3 sections. The first section of each tier, for example Choose or Die and the upgrades, unlocks the second section, and each of these technologies unlocks a further 3 technologies as part of the third section. The first section of the first tier, Choose or Die, is unlocked automatically. To unlock the first section of further tiers, distinguished with the word Upgrade, you need to complete the second section of the previous tier. In other words, to unlock Upgrade 1, I must research Driven by Vengeance, Battle as Business, and Founded on Tyranny. Alright, with that out of the way, I'm just going to go through some of the most important technologies, in my opinion. Founded on Tyranny, you want to get ASAP, as the extra growth is super useful, and immediately following you should be getting Revel in Suffering for even further extra growth. These two combined give you plus 25 extra growth. Continuous slave supply is awesome, but not necessary in the early game, as you don't have the infrastructure for the slave economy set up yet. Exploit feuds, then, you should get right after Revel in Suffering. The public order is, of course, useful as you're going to be experiencing a lot of rebellions. Battle as Business should be next, not so much for the rating bonus, but for the post-battle loot. Chartered Piracy should follow immediately after for the huge settlement sack boost and upkeep reduction. The rest of the technologies in the first tier are okay, but none really stand out. In the second tier, Tempered in Blood is great for the slave economy, along with Daylight Denied. So when you have the infrastructure set up for the slave economy, definitely get these 2 techs. Everything unlocked by Forge to Kill. Forge to Kill itself is pretty good. It provides a lot of missile damage and weapon strength for your early tier units. But the technologies it unlocks are super strong. For example, 10% damage to Reaper Bolt Throwers, 25% ammunition, reload time reduction, 10%, reworked crossbows, plus 20% for Dark Shards, Blackguard Corsair, Shades, and Dark Riders, and extra 15% range. Super, super strong. So all of these 3 technologies are great. Hit and Run is good too if you're running a lot of cav. It also provides a reload time reduction for Shades as well, and speed for Shades, and weapon strength for Shades. So these 2 combined really buff your Shades up. So, but the most notable ones in this category, I would say reworked crossbows come first, then bolt cartridges, and then Hit and Run if I had to choose. The rest in tier 2 aren't all that notable, in my opinion. In the third tier, Pressed into Servitude and Consumed by Rivalry are nice for extra recruitment capacity alongside the Loyalty and Public Order. Additionally, everything unlocked by Pressed into Servitude provides upkeep reduction, which is nothing to turn your nose up at. And unfortunately, in tier 3, there really isn't much else that stands out. I mean, everything here is kind of decent. Walking into Darkness is actually one that kind of stands out a bit for the extra campaign movement range, but besides that, nothing else is really all that amazing. In the fourth and last tier, the only thing that stands out as great is a Life of Dread, so you don't lose slaves as quickly, and hopefully by the point that you get to the fourth tier, you have your slave economy set up and rolling. Everything else is okay, but an honorable mention goes to Deadly Accountability, as plus 10 leadership for lords and heroes is actually quite strong. So, yeah, as I said, a lot of, those are the main technologies I would say you should definitely focus on getting. The other ones are decent, but nothing as amazing as the ones I pointed out, in my opinion. So those are the most important technologies that you should be focusing on. And finally, final words. Thank you all very much for watching, and I hope you learned quite a bit. Any and all feedback is appreciated, so don't forget to leave a comment if you have something you want brought to my attention. As always, like if you liked it, dislike if you disliked it. This video took many hours to make, from scripting to recording to deleting and re-recording and editing. So if you'd like to see more stuff like this, let me know. The second part, going over army compositions and early game strategy, should come out in the next few weeks, assuming nothing goes horrendously wrong. That said, thank you all very much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Cheers, guys.